Welcome everyone to the current edition of Stories for Healing. As many of you know, this is a series that we started a little over a week ago. And in response to just the divisiveness and the anxiety and all the fear and anger that's circulating around our communities and our countries and the world. And, it got a little heavy. It gets a little heavy. And so as a storyteller, I asked myself, what do I do about this? Well, the answer is obvious. I have to tell stories, but what kind of stories and why? And it's pretty clear to me, and I think to most of you, that what we need are not stories about who we say is right and wrong, or what is a good thing to do and a bad thing to do, but they're stories about healing and reconciliation. And that when we tell these stories and when we hear these stories, then really everybody can start to heal. Ourselves, first and foremost, need some healing. And the people we live with and the people we work with, we all need to find some healing. And so we tell these stories of healing for healing twice a day. Today, we're especially pleased to have with us as our guest storyteller, Cassandra Wye. And I'd like to invite you, Cassandra, to tell us a story.
Thank you, Jim. I want you to imagine that there is a desert that stretches as far as the eye can see. A desert that ripples in the wind. A desert where the sand changes color from black to gold to brown as the sun travels across the sky. And at the edge of the desert, the land begins to rise and turn to stone, and the stone turns to hills, and there is 1, 2, 3 of them. And nestled amongst those hills, there is an oasis, a green valley of orange and lemon tree. And in that valley, there is a meeting place where the tribe's people, as they made their way across the desert so many centuries ago, there they would meet. And the meeting place became a marketplace. And there they settled and started to build their houses, carving them from the stone of the hills. And it is said that the biggest house of all, a palace, was carved by the Sultan himself. The Sultan of Stone, who was as harsh and as unyielding as the stone which made his city and over which he ruled. And the Sultan, he had children, many of them. Hassan was the oldest, and he was known as Hassan the Joyful, for when he walked into a room, his smile would light up the room, and everyone would bask in the light of his smile. And Hassan, wow, he looked after his brothers and sisters, but especially the youngest, Layla. And Layla was as different to him as summer is to winter. And she was known as Layla the willful, for she would not and she would not and she would not do as she was told, not for anybody, except for her beloved brother, Hassan. For her mother had died when young, and Hassan had been both brother and mother to her. And he had encouraged her to walk and listened to her when she began to talk, and she loved him. And she loved all the things that he had done with her and done for her all those years. And time passed. And as the Sultan grew old, he knew that it was time for him to choose a successor. And he wanted to choose his son, Hassan, of course. But he worried that Hassan was too soft, too generous, too yielding. And so he set for him a quest, a task, a test. To go out into the oasis and find a new watering hole, to go out into the desert, and find a new watering hole and make a new oasis that would one day grow up to be a city as big and as grand as theirs. And Hassan was delighted. He took his horse and he got together his bedroll and his stores of food and water for who knows how long he would have to ride. And he was off. Goodbye, said all the people as they watched him disappear into the distance, just a dot, and then the dot was gone. Come back, whispered Layla, please, come back. But after many days, he was still gone. And the people gathered at the edge of the oasis looking out over the desert, and there was no sign of him. Layla went with them, and she would wait all through the day, wait until the night came, wait until they dragged her back and said, enough, Layla, he won't come back at night, it's too dark, it's too cold. And she waited, keeping vigil both daytime and at night in her room. And the days passed and the weeks passed until they all realized he was gone. He was gone and would not return. And the people, they gathered together and they cried and they mourned for him. And Layla, she sobbed and sobbed. But her father, the Sultan, he looked out of his window and he saw all the people gathering day after day. And he thought, enough is enough. No work is being done. Enough is enough. Enough of grief. We must move on. And so he went to the marketplace and issued a proclamation, an order. My son Hassan was set a test, a quest, and he failed, and he is gone. He is no longer my son. And no one shall speak of him or mourn him on pain of death. It is as like he as if he was never born. And in silence, the people watched him go back to the palace, and Layla wanted to run after him and say, no! But she could not. He was the Sultan. And the next day, she wanted to talk to her brothers and sisters about Hassan, but they did not want to disobey their father. And the next day, she wanted to talk to the people of the palace, the cook, the grooms, but they were too scared to disobey her father. No one would talk to her. No one would listen. And at night, she lay there in bed, curled up, crying as silently as she could, whispering, until one night she saw a glimmer of light up the mountainside. And so she climbed out of bed and out of the window and followed the light. And there by the fire sat the goat herds. And in the comfort of the darkness, she said to them, do you remember my brother, Hassan? Yes, they said, and told her stories of how he would join them at night. And if a goat went off wandering, as goats often do, he would go after the goat and bring it back. No matter how long it took, he would come back with it safe and sound. And Layla was comforted. She felt the pain in her heart grow less. And back she went to bed and she slept for the first night in weeks. But the next day when she woke up and she went back up the mountain, the fire was trampled out and the goat herds were gone. And it was said that the king had been given word of what they had done, and they had been punished for their crime. And from that day on, no one would speak to Layla. She was shunned for what she had done. Until at last, she could bear the pain of it no longer. And she went to her father and said, please, if you will not let me speak of my brother, then please banish me too. For without the memory of him, it is not worth living. And then she looked up at her father's face as a tear rolled down his cheek. And he said to her, please, will you tell me about my son? For I cannot remember his face. And so Layla told him She sat and told him of all the things that Hassan had done for her and how much she loved him. And as her memories filled the room, the sound of their laughter trickled out. And as the sun began to set, her father took her by the hand and led her out to the marketplace and said, "When my son died, I would not forgive him, and I wanted to pretend that I could forget him. And Layla today has showed me that I was wrong. And from this day on, Layla will be known as Layla the Wise, for she has given me back my son." And from that day on, Layla the Wise stayed. And she stayed teaching people how to remember those they loved in stories and song.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful story. How did you first come across that story?
Well, I can't remember. The reason why I've been thinking about it, I haven't told it for years, so I've been rehearsing it all day, Jim. But the reason why I thought of it, it came back into my head, as stories do, you don't tell them for about 10 years and back they come, was, we were talking right when we first met, right back at the start of lockdown. Both Jim and I work with children in hospitals. I work with children in a cancer hospital. And the grief sometimes is almost too much to bear. And as a storyteller, I have confidentiality issues. I'm not allowed to talk about what I have seen. And the grief that I feel for the children that I have got to know and who have gone. And it became almost too much for me to bear. And then over lockdown, I was listening to teachers saying, how can we talk to children about this? One school was saying, we have 25 people we have lost. How?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I don't know. And it's interesting what you said at the beginning about as storytellers, we tell stories. I was thinking, I don't know what story to tell. And I've been working with this young artist called Anna Rathbone. And she's not a storyteller, she's a maker. And one of her friends committed suicide. And she was a maker too. And so her family sent Anna her sewing machine and all the threads. And Anna has been making an installation out of those threads, and she sits in the installation and she tells people about her friend, and she's making a book as she tells them. So she's stitching them, not just I wanted to say stories, stitches and songs, because that's what I've learned from Anna.
Sure.
I couldn't think of what to do, but Anna could. And I'm like, well done, Anna, well done. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Sure. Oh, goodness.
It's just a beautiful way of remembering people, and it's her own.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen it yet. I look forward to it, but it is just that.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't actually know what story to tell, but you do.
Yeah.
Carry on. Shall I make the tea?
Well, and the other thing I just wanted to reflect on is as we look back on those we've lost and other parts of our lives that, we've either lost or tried to put behind us or whatever. We don't just tell the stories of the sweetness.
No.
If we don't tell the stories of the pain and the loss that's part of that whole story, then we really haven't recovered them at all. We've just built that wall a little more solidly between us and those parts of our lives, people, times, places, whatever. And I think for me, what our challenge is going forward is to let people know that we can tell stories about both. And we don't have to tell, there's some of us or some who want to just recall the pain and the injury and all the terrible things that happened. And they did, and there's others who just want to sugarcoat it and say, oh no, the most wonderful thing in the world. And then but in either case, we're fracturing the world into unreal pieces until we bring it back together.
And it's a really good point. I mean, I'm disabled, and so many people want to see it as a triumph against adversity. And actually, no, it's not. It's not like
No.
that at all. And it's really interesting because it's exactly that. I
Yeah.
want to tell you, I'm happy to tell you about being disabled, but in the scope of everything that I am.
That's
Because
right.
every story is about being disabled, because here I am.
Here you are.
And what that means, and what that costs, and what that gives. And it
Yes.
is so important that people tell the story their way and are not stopped by other people going, well, that's a bit uncomfortable, or
Right.
that's not the metaphor I want, or that's
That's
not the
right.
theme of our festival. And it's like, well, you know,
That's what we got.
yes, here we are. Here we
Okay.
are.
Well, again, thank you. And to everyone else, you know, this is part of the great joy of doing this, as we get to talk about these things. I want to invite you to continue to come back twice a day for at least the next couple of weeks, as we hear from storytellers literally from around the world, who are all doing our best to bring healing to each other and to ourselves. Um, if you don't happen to be able to watch it at the times it's on, which are 2:30 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the evening on the East Coast of the United States, um, please, you can rewatch them on Facebook, or if that's too much of a challenge for you, which it is for me, there's also a playlist on YouTube, and you can go back and see them all there. I can tell you these are being viewed thousands of times in on Facebook, and hundreds of times on YouTube, and it's just a real humbling project to be part of. So again, Stories for Healing will be back this evening. Look forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.